Well, hello there. As you can see, I'm back in front of the bookshelf for a bit of variety. Talking today about the 1986 IP adaptation, I suppose is the best way to put it, with the movie Biggles. This is a very strange examination of what a film would look like if it was constructed by producers without really any creative intent behind it. Now, I debated with a friend about this quite extensively because I was trying to get my head around why this film came to be in the form that it did. And he was saying, as someone who lived in that period, that he did sort of understand why they would have made a film like Biggles. So, just to talk around it, Biggles, of course, is the classic World War One and then World War Two pilot from, I believe, novels and comic books. And he had very pulp-style adventures, where he was flying around in a plane with his buddies, taking out originally just sort of World War One soldiers, but then Nazi enemies, and doing very classic comic book. Like, when I say comic book, I don't mean like DC Marvel. I mean like comic strip style adventures that you could imagine from like the 30s and 40s. And it is definitely a timepiece where, I mean, if you hear the name Biggles and you have any inkling of it, you think World War One or Two, pilot, slightly campy, slightly British upper lip style. It definitely evokes a certain something to it. However, I definitely am many generations on from even being aware of Biggles. The name resonated with me, and a few sort of culturally relevant sort of things, but it's not exactly like I, as someone who lives in 2021, have any great personal affection for the Biggles property. So, jump back to 86, when Alex Hugh would have directed this, and so the film, I suppose, to sort of leap straight into it and to sort of break the seal, instead of doing a period drama adaptation or maybe some kind of modern interpretation of a pilot, what they decided to do was make it a time travel, faux science fiction, sort of pseudo Indiana Jones story. It's very much in the sort of balance between Indiana Jones and Back to the Future. I mean, I sort of at the beginning disparagingly refer to it as something which would have been made by film producers with no creative oversight. The reason I'm sort of that dismissive is it does feel like a film where people who were aware of what was popular at the time decided to put together a film. They acquired an IP and they went, okay, what's popular right now? And the things that sort of were introduced in that respect were time travel, sort of 80s corporate America, and rock music, like synth rock music, in the sort of Duran sort of model. And so desperately they're trying to take this property and cram in these elements to it, and it so palpably doesn't work that it's fascinating just as a study of what exactly the intention behind this was. I mean, as I said, my friend who was a child at the time of the film's release said, well, the biggest considerations were the fact that, one, you didn't make IP films in the 80s, not to the degree that we do now with, like I said, Marvel and DC and book adaptations and YA stuff. It was very much a platform for people to just tell stories. And so, or if it wasn't an adaptation, it was more like a stylized adaptation, as in something like Star Wars, which obviously derives from sort of the hero's journey, or Indiana Jones, which of course derives from the pulp style, but these weren't IPs that existed before. They were original creations that were then sort of put together in a way that people would identify with. And he said that people of his generation would never go to see a World War One period drama about a character named Biggles. Not kids. And bearing in mind that this kind of film would have been advertised towards kids. And so what they decide to do is, like I said, it begins in the modern day, in modern America, where you have like this 20-something guy who's sort of your corporate hotshot, has a attractive girlfriend, has a really well-paying job, a fast pace of life, and then inexplicably he just starts to find himself appearing in World War One alongside this character named Biggles. And so the first act of this film is that strange fish out of water guy thinking he might be having some kind of mental breakdown, and obviously the reactions of other people around him as he jumps between World War One and present day. And it doesn't work. To me, it absolutely doesn't work, because one, whoever thought that Biggles needed an American lead and setting is, it completely doesn't work in terms of what you anticipate for that story. The time travel element feeds no part into the Biggles aspect of the story. And like I said, it has this synth rock style to it, in terms of the soundtrack, that again, doesn't feel like it's channeling any kind of World War One style aesthetic. It just feels like it's like, oh, let's use this style because this is what's popular in music right now for young people. And then they do other things, like they bring in Peter Cushing, who plays sort of the guy who knew Biggles in World War One, but is an old man now and sort of talks our lead through the events, what's happening to him. And it very much has the style as sort of, as I like to say, that we do get this a fair amount now as well, where you have these incredibly well-respected older actors who frankly don't care that much anymore, and will jump on any property if it's a nice paycheck and they don't have to travel, say, more than 100 miles from their home. And it definitely has that kind of feel to it. Like that Peter Cushing said yes because it was an easy job, but his role in it's very strange. It's very sort of like, well, I suppose he's the only connecting tissue between the two stories. So as I said, the problem is they feel like disparate films. They feel like this modern-day American film, and they feel like this pulpy Biggles World War One pilot film. And even when the character jumps back in time, he then, at certain points, takes a bit of a back seat, because he's your lead, but it's quite clear, the film is called Biggles, so Biggles should be your lead. And there are certain points where he definitely sort of steps back, and Biggles sort of takes charge. Although, again, it really doesn't have the courage of its convictions, because Biggles isn't really a character. He doesn't have a personality. He is purely a representation of an archetype for that kind of World War One jolly-ho, that's not the way we do things in Britain kind of pilot. And again, it really doesn't have the edges to it. And then, like I say, when he keeps jumping back to present day, it honestly feels like a different film, and the tone just doesn't work. I get, like I said, it sort of is trying to clearly sort of evoke Back to the Future, but your lead doesn't, the Jim Ferguson character doesn't have the charisma of, say, Michael J. Marty McFly, Michael J. Fox. But nor does he have that kind of charisma of, say, someone like Bill Murray, who could maybe have carried it off. it really does feel like a very bland, very... It's very much what we talk about a lot in terms of the issues with Hollywood model, where you need your most relatable, generic character because audiences can see themselves through the eyes of that character. Now, I absolutely don't agree with that, but it's clearly a model that is returned to and used, and I think that's the problem, because this guy is so bland and generic that him going back in time feels like it's just an excuse, so then we can have the adventure stuff. The Biggles stuff is fine. It's sort of very, like I say, stereotypical pulpy World War One storytelling, and the characters in it are very, like I say, archetypal. You have Biggles, you have his crew of people, you have this sort of Baron Von type villain, you have this dubious love interest, and they're not particularly deep in any way. They do have another science fiction-y kind of thing, which is to do with the weapon that the Germans are developing, but again, it's kind of arbitrary, and it doesn't relate to anything to do with the time travel. It's just something else that's going on that they need to stop. And so overall, the film struggles. It really struggles under the weight of its own inability to tell a particularly interesting story. And it does things like it introduces a girlfriend character for our lead. Not introduces, she's there with him in the beginning, and she's in the modern day. And because of plot reasons, she also at one point goes back in time to the World War One. But it feels almost sexist to the point where she can't cope with the idea of being in World War One. She reacts badly to everything. She exposes sort of her out of time, struggling nature to sort of the enemy, and obviously that sort of puts her in danger. And her section ends with her falling into a bin. And then the next time we see her, the main guy's marrying her. And it's just like, wow, that really feels like you don't really know how to write female characters, and you're there to almost to sort of have her be a damsel and almost to humiliate her. So yeah, stuff like that. It's a very strange film, but like I say, it's an interesting... You could do a really interesting deconstruction of something like this and the model that is used to make these kinds of... Oh, this will hit these kinds of demographic type of films. But yeah, it's an odd watch, and I can see why it sort of disappeared in the annals of history. Well, I've never heard of this adaptation, and why it's not sort of doesn't come up in bad movies or movies that people sort of watch for fun. But it is something that exists. Anyway, if you like the video, please hit the like button, comment on the video, and share, because those all help me in the algorithm. Subscribe to the channel and hit the little bell to get notifications for when new videos go up. Follow me on Twitter at Jordan_Woodley, where I'm always tweeting about TV shows and movies, and I put these videos once they're up on YouTube. Thank you for joining me. Take care.